Now that we've added our watch target, we want to start building some of the interfaces that we'll be working with on the watchOS application. So we'll start by reviewing the WatchKit app structure and looking at the extension and interfaces. Then we'll create a WK interface table view on one of our interfaces. And we'll create a table row controller to manage the table rows. Then finally, we'll populate this table view with data. In the last video, we added Dreamseeker Watch application into our project. When we did this, it created these two new targets. We have Dreamseeker Watch and we have Dreamseeker Watch extension. The Dreamseeker Watch target takes care of the interface and the assets that go alongside this, as well as the assets for the icons. The Dreamseeker Watch extension takes care of the whole interface control around these interfaces. In order to get your head around what this means, if you consider an interface similar to a view controller within a standard iOS project. So let's get started with adding something into our interface. We want to create a table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Utilities panel and open up the object library. Let's make this a little bit larger so we can see more of the items. And then I'm going to grab a table and I'm going to drag it onto my interface. When I do this, it creates a table on my interface controller, which has got a table row controller which contains a group. I'm then going to scroll down and select a label and drag this onto my group. I'll set the number of lines to 0. Let's quickly hide this down here and hide the Utilities panel. In order to work with the different objects that we place on our interfaces, we need to work with NSObjects implementing different protocols. So here I'm going to create a new Swift file and I'm going to call this Dream Table Row Controller because this is a file that's going to control the rows within my table. I'll quickly copy this because I'll need this a little bit later. I'll make sure it's attached to my Dreamseeker Watch extension. And so I'm going to create a new class and I'll paste that in and I'll make it a subclass of NSObject. Then let's go back to our interface storyboard and I'll open up the assistant editor. First, I'm going to drag my table across into my interface controller and I'm going to name this Table View and it will create a WK interface table. Then I'm going to select my Dream Table Row controller on the right side. And then I'm going to make my Table Row controller a subclass of this Dream Table Row controller. And I'll add an identifier of Dream Table Row controller. Let's quickly hide this Utilities panel. I'll press Ctrl and drag the label across into my Dream Table Row controller and call this label. As you can see, this throws an error now. This is because we need to import the WatchKit into our class. So instead of Foundation, we'll write WatchKit. Now let's show the standard editor instead of the assistant editor, and we'll open up the interface controller. So I'm going to dummy up some data because I want to see that this works in the table view. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new method and call this funcReloadData. What we'll need to do is work with a data source of some kind. So I'm going to create a quick data source up at the top, which will be a data source containing an array of strings. So I'll call this letDataSource, have it as an array of strings, and I'll put in here A, and I'll copy this, I'll paste this in a few times here, and I'll put B, C, D, and one last one, I'll put as E. Then within reload data, I'll create a new property called number of objects, and set that equal to the dataSource.count. And I'll put table view, set number of rows, and this will set the number of rows within the table view. And I'll put that equal to the number of objects. And now I'll use the identifier we had before, which was Dream Table Row Controller. And now we need to populate the data within our rows. So now we'll enumerate our data source. So we'll put for index, dream in dataSource.enumerate, which will give us the index as well as the value. I'll check to see whether it's going to be a type of Dream Table Row Controller. So I'll put if let row equals table view dot row controller at index, pass across the index, as Dream Table Row Controller. Then row.label.set text, and I'll pass in my dream. Now, let's take this reload data, and we'll place that within the awake with context method. And when I build and run the application, I now have these different rows within my table view on my Apple Watch. So now that we have a table view, let's look at how we can use app groups to make use of the core data files that we want to use.